You owe us everything. You would not have a single dime to your name if it were not for this family." The scream shattered the quiet elegance of my Silicon Valley neighborhood. I stood in the doorway of my custom-built estate, holding a cup of black coffee, staring at the absolute absurdity unfolding on my front porch. The people who abandoned me in the freezing snow 22 years ago were now waving a Forbes magazine in my face, demanding a cut of my $80 million company. I did not scream back. I simply took a sip of my coffee and told them I did not have a family. They thought they could bully me into submission. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who dismantles digital threats for a living. And I was about to trap them in a federal crime they would never see coming. I am Sydney, 34 years old, and I am the CEO and founder of a cybersecurity software company. Before I take you through the incredible events of the past few weeks, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family threw you to the wolves. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when my past decided to knock on my heavy oak front door. On my pristine welcome mat stood Thomas and Brenda, the two people who contributed half of my DNA and exactly 0% of my success. Beside them was Stephanie, my younger sister, clutching a designer handbag she definitely could not afford on her part-time retail salary. She wore that familiar arrogant smirk I had not seen in over 2 decades. In Thomas's trembling, rage-filled hand was a crumpled copy of this month's Forbes magazine. My face was on the cover right next to the bold headline, detailing my $80 million merger. "You think you can just hide away in California and pretend we do not exist?" Brenda shrieked, squeezing out a few highly practiced theatrical tears. "We saw the news, Sydney. $80 million. We are your parents, we raised you. You owe us your fair share of that money." I looked at the three of them. Thomas, with his red face and bulging veins, still looking like a man who believed the world owed him a favor. Brenda playing the fragile victim. Stephanie stepping forward as if she already owned my home. "We need cash, Sydney," Stephanie sneered. "Andre and I are looking at a new house, and Dad has debts. You are swimming in money. 20 million is pocket change to you. Hand it over, or we will let the media know how the great Silicon Valley CEO abandons her poor struggling parents." I looked right into Stephanie's eyes. "Your debts are not my problem, Stephanie. And neither is your mortgage. You want millions. Learn to code. Put in the 100-hour weeks. Risk everything. Until then, you get nothing." Thomas stepped forward, invading my personal space. "It is not extortion. It is a family tax. You are a curse. You have always been a curse." I pressed a single button on my smartwatch linking directly to my gated community security office. I told them I had 3 trespassers harassing me and requested the local police. "Watch me," I replied, stepping back and shutting the heavy oak door directly in their faces. I heard the muffled sounds of them screaming and banging on the wood, followed a few minutes later by the wail of approaching sirens. They were forced off my property, but I knew this was not the end. To understand the sheer delusion of their demands, you have to understand what happened 22 years ago. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, I was the undisputed scapegoat of our household. Thomas and Brenda were obsessed with appearances, social climbing, and living vastly beyond their means. Stephanie was their golden child, pampered, praised, and groomed to marry rich. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, analytical child who preferred coding on a clunky second-hand computer to attending their country club dinners. I was a stain on their perfect image. When I was 10 years old, Thomas's reckless financial decisions finally caught up with him. He had poured the family savings into a disastrous, highly leveraged investment scheme that completely imploded. Bankruptcy was not just looming. It had kicked the front door down. But narcissists never take accountability. They need a target. Instead of admitting his monumental failure, Thomas turned to Brenda, who had bizarrely consulted a local psychic. The verdict they reached together was absolute insanity. I was a curse. They genuinely convinced themselves that my quiet nature and weird obsession with computers were bringing bad luck to the household. I will never forget that night in December. It was freezing, the wind howling through the streets carrying sharp bites of snow. Thomas grabbed my arm, dragged me to the front door, and threw me out onto the icy porch. Brenda tossed a black trash bag containing my few items of clothing out after me. "You are a parasite," Thomas had screamed, his face contorted with misplaced rage. "Take your bad luck and get out of my sight. Do not ever come back." I was 10 years old. I sat on the freezing concrete, clutching that trash bag, watching the lights in my own house turn off one by one. They left me there. No phone, no money, no mercy. I walked 4 miles in the dark, shivering uncontrollably, my tears freezing on my cheeks. If it had not been for Aunt Beverly, I do not know what would have happened to me. Beverly was Thomas's older sister, the black sheep of the family. Because she chose to be a middle school math teacher instead of chasing wealth, she found me huddled on her porch 3 hours later. She took me in, legally, fought for custody against parents who did not even want me, and raised me with more love and fierce dedication than my biological parents ever possessed. For 22 years, Thomas, Brenda, and Stephanie completely erased me from their lives. No birthdays, no holidays, no high school graduation. When I earned a full-ride scholarship to Stanford, there was silence. When I built my first software program in my dorm room, there was silence. When Aunt Beverly passed away from cancer 5 years ago, leaving me devastated, they did not even send a single card. I built my empire from the ground up, surviving on cheap noodles, 18-hour coding sessions, and sheer unrelenting willpower. I designed an encryption software that caught the attention of major tech firms, eventually scaling it into a massive enterprise. I did it entirely on my own. Yet, now looking at them on my porch, demanding millions because they saw a magazine cover, I felt a profound sense of disgust. They thought they could just walk back into my life and claim the fruits of my labor. They thought they were playing a game of family guilt. But they had just stepped into a corporate battlefield, and in my world, if you identify a threat, you do not just block it. You completely dismantle it. I immediately called my lead corporate attorney. They are going to launch a smear campaign. I told him, let them make as much noise as they want. I want them to feel overconfident. In cybersecurity, when a hostile entity attacks your network, the worst thing you can do is block them immediately. They will just find another way in. Instead, you create a honeypot, a decoy system designed to look vulnerable. You let the attackers in. Let them think they are winning. All while you quietly log their every move, gathering the indisputable evidence you need to lock them away forever. My family wanted a war. I was going to give them a federal trap. The very next morning, the real assault began. I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room of my headquarters, reviewing documents for our impending $80 million merger. The office air was electric with the energy of a tech firm on the verge of acquisition. Any unexpected variable could trigger a panic among the acquiring board members. Me, that was exactly what my family was banking on. My executive assistant, Monica, rushed rapidly into the room with wide, alarmed eyes. She had been with me for exactly 3 years, and was usually the epitome of calm professional efficiency. "Sydney, I am so deeply sorry to interrupt." Monica dropped to a panicked whisper. "People in the main lobby are demanding to see you right now. They bypassed visitor registration and are causing a massive scene. An older man screaming that he is your father brought a lawyer. They are threatening to call the news networks if we deny them immediate access." I simply closed my laptop with a quiet click. Narcissists are predictable. Once they realize they cannot breach your personal boundaries, they attack your professional sanctuary, hoping public embarrassment forces you into submission. "Send them up to meeting room B," I instructed smoothly. "Have security escort them. Once they are inside, I want 2 armed guards standing outside the door." Meeting room B was designed for hostile negotiations. It was soundproof, windowless, and equipped with discreet security cameras. It was a sterile, intimidating space meant to remind anyone sitting inside that they were entirely on my territory. I adjusted my blazer, maintaining a steady breathing rhythm as I walked down the corridor. I needed to analyze their exact angle of attack before I destroyed it. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany door, the scene inside was almost comical in its desperation. Thomas, Stephanie, and a slick man in a cheap suit sat around the conference table. Brenda was absent, likely playing the frail victim back at their hotel. Thomas leaned back in his ergonomic chair, projecting the aura of a wealthy investor. Stephanie vibrated in her seat, calculating the value of the custom furniture while looking at me with burning jealousy. "Nice place you have got here," Thomas said, gesturing to the skyline views. "Must cost a fortune to lease this much square footage. Glad to see my investment is paying off so handsomely." I ignored his bait entirely. I walked to the head of and took a seat directly across from them, folding my hands neatly. "State your business, Thomas. I have a highly profitable company to run, and your presence is currently an unauthorized distraction." The man in the cheap suit cleared his throat and pulled out printed documents. "Miss Williams, my name is Richard Pendleton. I am the legal counsel representing your family. We are here today to formally request a 30% equity stake in this software company, as well as a retroactive cash payout of $20 million directly from your upcoming acquisition merger." I stared at him completely blank. The audacity of the demand was so disconnected from legal reality that I had to suppress a laugh. 30% equity, $20 million. They had marched into a secure corporate facility to execute a shakedown based on nothing but biological relation. 30%, I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. Based on what legal precedent? Exactly the fact that we happened to share a blood type. Based on initial seed funding, Richard stated confidently, sliding a piece of paper across the polished table toward me. "My client is the primary angel investor of this entire enterprise." I looked down at the piece of paper. It was a faded, poorly photocopied bank statement, dating back exactly 30 years. The statement showed a single-line item highlighted in bright yellow marker. It was a transfer of $5,000 from Thomas's checking account to an account belonging to my late Aunt Beverly. "When Beverly took you in, she could not afford to raise a child." Thomas lied, his eyes gleaming with malicious greed. "I gave her $5,000 to keep a roof over your head. Beverly told me she used that exact money to buy you your first computer, the very computer you used to learn software coding. Therefore, my $5,000 was the initial investment that launched your career. I own a substantial piece of everything you have built, Sydney. I'll build this company using my capital." Stephanie slammed her hands on the table, leaning forward aggressively. "You owe us, Sydney. Do you know how hard things have been for us? I have massive credit card debts. Andre is stressing out every single night about paying our mortgage, and you are hoarding millions of dollars. You stole our father's money to build this place, and now it is time for you to pay us back." But focusing on Andre was a problem for later. Right now, I had to deal with the 3 delusional extortionists in my conference room, waving a 30-year-old bank statement like it was a binding corporate contract. I picked up the flimsy piece of paper, holding it up to the bright light of the conference room. I examined the faded ink and the ridiculous yellow highlighter mark, taking a deliberate breath and prepared to systematically dismantle the most absurd legal argument I had encountered in my life. I set the paper back down on the mahogany table with a slow, deliberate motion. The silence in the room stretched until the tension became almost suffocating. I looked directly at the man calling himself a legal professional. "Mr. Pendleton," I began, my voice cold and entirely stripped of emotion. "Let me educate you on corporate law, since you clearly missed that semester. What you have handed me is a 30-year-old bank transfer from my father to my aunt. There is no accompanying promissory note. There is no equity agreement. There is no incorporation document tying this sum to any business entity, primarily because I was 10 years old at the time and completely incapable of signing a legally binding contract." Pendleton shifted uncomfortably in his cheap suit. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately. "Furthermore," I continued, leaning forward slightly to hold his gaze, "I know exactly what this $5,000 was used for. It was not seed funding for my first computer. It was a desperate loan Thomas begged from Aunt Beverly to cover a massive illicit gambling debt he accumulated after bankrupting his own family. Beverly kept meticulous financial records, which I inherited upon her passing. I have the receipts proving Thomas paid this exact amount back to her 18 months later to avoid having his kneecaps broken by his creditors." Thomas turned a violent shade of crimson. You ungrateful little brat. I am your father. You owe me everything. I owe you absolutely nothing. I stated, shifting my icy gaze to Stephanie, who was staring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You abandoned me in the freezing snow, legally relinquished custody to Beverly, and completely erased me from your lives. You had zero involvement in the founding, incorporation, funding, or scaling of this software firm. Claiming a 30% equity stake based on a repaid gambling loan from 3 decades ago is not just legally illiterate. It borders on criminal extortion. Stephanie slammed her fist against the table, rattling the glass water pitchers. You are swimming in cash. Sydney, you can afford to give us $20 million. If you do not pay us right now, we are going to make your life a living hell. Andre and I need that money. Dad needs that money. You stole our future by getting lucky in Silicon Valley. Your financial incompetence is not my responsibility, Stephanie, I replied, maintaining my clinical tone. You want millions. Then you need to learn how to code. You need to put in the 100-hour work weeks. You need to risk everything you have on a single idea. Until you do that, you get absolutely nothing from me. Thomas abruptly stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward with a loud crash. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. If you do not sign over the equity today, we will destroy you. We will go straight to the press. We will tell every local newspaper and national tabloid that you are a fraud, that you stole your initial capital from your struggling elderly parents, and that you threw us out on the street. Let us see how your new corporate partners like a massive public relations nightmare right before they sign an $80 million merger. They were attempting to use social leverage, a classic narcissistic manipulation tactic. They hoped the threat of public embarrassment would force me to offer a hush money settlement to protect my corporate reputation. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I did not operate on panic or emotion. I operated on threat assessment and total neutralization. Are you finished? I asked quietly. We will see you in federal court. The fake lawyer blustered hastily, shoving his useless documents back into his worn briefcase and scrambling to stand up. I pressed a small silver button hidden beneath the edge of the conference table. Almost instantly, the heavy double doors swung open. 3 of my private corporate security guards stepped into the room. They were heavily built, professionally trained, and visibly armed. Escort these individuals out of the building, immediately, I ordered, without breaking eye contact with Thomas. If they ever set foot on company property again, have them arrested for trespassing. The lead guard stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Thomas's shoulder. Let us go, sir. Thomas violently jerked his arm away, but the guard quickly subdued him, locking his arm in a firm compliance hold. As security began physically marching them toward the door, Thomas lost whatever remained of his composure. His true nature was fully exposed for my staff to see through the glass walls of the conference room. You are a curse, Thomas screamed, his voice echoing down the executive hallway as he dug his heels into the carpet. You have always been a curse. I will ruin you. I will make sure the whole world knows what a monster you are. You will lose everything. Stephanie trailed behind him, shouting obscenities while frantically trying to adjust her designer jacket. The lawyer scurried out ahead of them, clearly terrified of the armed guards. I watched them being dragged out, my heart rate completely steady. They thought they were playing a simple game of family guilt and public shaming. They believed I would crumble under the threat of media exposure. But they had just stepped into a high-stakes corporate battlefield. And in my world, if you identify a hostile threat, you do not just block it. You completely dismantle it so it can never harm you again. I walked back to my desk and immediately picked up my phone to call my lead corporate attorney. They are going to launch a massive smear campaign in the press, I told him the moment he answered. Let them do it. Let them make as much noise as they possibly can. I want them to feel completely overconfident. In the cybersecurity industry, when a hostile entity attacks your network, the worst thing you can do is block their access immediately. If you block them, they will simply retreat, regroup, and find another hidden vulnerability to exploit later. Instead, you create a honeypot. A honeypot is a decoy system perfectly designed to look incredibly valuable and totally vulnerable. You let the attackers inside. You let them think they are winning the war, all while you quietly log their every single move, gathering the indisputable forensic evidence you need to lock them away in a federal prison forever. My family wanted to start a war. They wanted to use the media and the legal system to extort me. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to set a federal trap so perfectly disguised that their own greed would force them to spring it. The upcoming media storm was just the first phase of their inevitable self-destruction, and I was fully prepared to watch them dig their own graves. The smear campaign escalated faster than a viral malware infection, breaching an unsecured network. By Wednesday morning, my executive dashboard was flashing with severe media monitoring alerts. I sat in my home office, sipping coffee, while watching the real-time data roll in. They had launched a highly coordinated, emotionally manipulative digital assault designed to destroy my public image and terrorize my corporate partners into forcing a settlement. Stephanie fired the first shot. She weaponized her fake tears for the internet, launching a fraudulent crowdfunding campaign titled "Help Save Elderly Parents Evicted by Billionaire Daughter." I clicked the link, analyzing the page with clinical detachment. The description was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and absolute fiction. Stephanie had posted an old, heavily filtered photograph of Thomas and Brenda looking frail and exhausted. Below the image, she spun a devastatingly fake narrative. She claimed that I had drained our family savings to fund my first software startup, promising to take care of my parents forever once I succeeded. The post detailed how I had ruthlessly abandoned them to face imminent foreclosure the moment my company hit an $80 million valuation. She even included a fabricated quote claiming I had looked my weeping mother in the eye and told her that poor people disgusted me. Within 4 hours, the campaign had raised over $6,000 from sympathetic strangers. Stephanie was not just lying to exact revenge. She was actively committing wire fraud by accepting donations under deeply fraudulent pretenses. I took screenshots of every donation, every update, and the digital footprint of the campaign creator. Every single dollar she collected was adding another month to her eventual federal prison sentence. Then came the second strike. Thomas had clearly been busy working the local press. My alert software caught the breaking news notification from a notorious digital tabloid known for destroying tech executives. The headline splashed across social media in massive red letters: Silicon Valley CEO abandons elderly parents to homelessness. I opened the article. Thomas had given an exclusive heart-wrenching interview. He painted himself as the sacrificial father who had worked his fingers to the bone to buy me my first computer, only to be cast out onto the street when he needed life-saving medical care. He claimed my company was built entirely on his stolen retirement fund. Brenda had provided a supporting quote stating, "She cried every night, wondering why her successful daughter hated the people who gave her everything." They even included a blurry paparazzi-style photo of me looking stern outside my corporate building, perfectly cementing my new role as the cold, ruthless corporate villain. The public backlash was instantaneous and vicious. The article went viral across every major social platform. My personal inbox flooded with hateful messages from strangers calling me a monster, a parasite, and a disgrace to women in business. Though people demanded my company be boycotted, social media activists began organizing a protest outside my headquarters. It was a textbook character assassination designed to induce panic and force a rapid financial payout. Most executives would have immediately issued a defensive press release or scrambled to pay the extortion fee to silence the noise. I did neither. I simply cataloged the libelous articles, traced the source IP addresses of the anonymous tipsters directly back to Stephanie's home network, and handed the raw data to my legal team. I needed them to feel invincible. However, the situation was rapidly bleeding into my professional reality. The true danger of their media warfare was not the public hatred. The true danger was the corporate fallout. My company was in the final due diligence phase of an $80 million acquisition by a global tech conglomerate. This acquiring board was notoriously conservative, heavily focused on public relations and ethical governance. They avoided scandal at all costs. 2 days after the tabloid article gained national traction, I found myself in an emergency video conference with the lead acquisitions director of the conglomerate. His name was David, and his expression on the high-definition monitor was grim. "Sydney, we are seeing some highly concerning noise in the press regarding pending litigation and severe familial financial disputes." David said, his tone strictly professional, but carrying an undeniable edge of warning. "We are purchasing a secure, highly reputable cybersecurity firm. We cannot inherit a messy, high-profile public relations disaster right before the final signing." "What exactly is the status of this 30% equity claim your family is parading around the media?" I looked directly into the camera lens, projecting absolute stability. "It is an entirely baseless, fabricated extortion attempt, David. There is no legal standing, no valid documentation, and no legitimate threat to the capitalization table of this company. I am handling the situation definitively." "See that you do," David replied sharply. "Our board is watching this situation very closely. If an actual legal injunction is filed against your corporate assets, or if this scandal impacts your client retention, we will be forced to pause the merger indefinitely to protect our own shareholders." The call ended, leaving the heavy weight of their ultimatum hanging in my office. My family was actively jeopardizing the biggest professional achievement of my life out of pure, unadulterated spite. They wanted to burn my empire to the ground if I refused to let them rule it. But the most complex piece on the board was not Thomas or Stephanie. It was Andre, Stephanie's husband. Andre was a senior financial auditor, an incredibly focused man who built his entire career on uncovering fraud and enforcing strict corporate compliance. I knew Stephanie was currently playing the innocent, defenseless victim at home, manipulating Andre with completely fake, dramatic tears, feeding him a heavily twisted narrative where I was the corporate villain who swindled his wife's struggling family. I needed Andre to see the absolute truth, but I could not simply call him. As an auditor, he would never believe simple family gossip. He required undeniable hard data. To get him that data, I had to ensure the pressure from the smear campaign reached a boiling point, forcing my family to make a critical, overconfident mistake. But while I was meticulously laying the groundwork for my digital trap, the collateral damage within my own company was escalating faster than I anticipated. The public relations nightmare had triggered a full-blown panic among my board of directors. My company was not a solo venture anymore. Over the years, I had taken on venture capital to scale our operations, meaning I answered to a board of highly influential Silicon Valley investors. These were people who calculated risk down to the fraction of a percent. On Thursday morning, just 4 days after the disastrous front porch encounter, my lead investor, Harrison, called an emergency board meeting. Walking into the executive boardroom, I could feel the suffocating weight of their anxiety. Harrison sat at the head of the long glass table, flanked by 4 other board members. The massive monitor behind them displayed a live feed of our company, Brand Sentiment Analytics, plunging downward in a steep red line. The viral fundraising campaign Stephanie launched had been picked up by a prominent tech blog. Protesters had actually shown up at our campus entrance that morning, holding cardboard signs calling me a corporate monster. "We have a massive problem," Sydney Harrison stated bluntly, skipping any pleasantries. "The acquiring conglomerate just flagged our public relations metrics. Their legal team is demanding a full disclosure regarding this alleged 30% equity claim your father is broadcasting. If this hits federal court, they will invoke the morality clause and terminate the $80 million acquisition." I took my seat at the table, maintaining perfect posture and absolute calm. "There is no equity claim, Harrison. It is a fabricated extortion attempt driven by estranged relatives looking for a quick payout. They do not possess a single shred of legally binding documentation." "That does not matter to the court of public opinion," interjected Monica, our head of public relations, who had been invited to the meeting. "Sydney, the optics are catastrophic. They have painted a narrative of a ruthless billionaire throwing her elderly, destitute parents out onto the street. We are getting slammed on every social platform. Our enterprise clients are calling our account managers, expressing deep concern over our corporate ethics. We are bleeding goodwill by the hour. The tension in the room was palpable. These investors stood to make millions from the impending merger, and they were watching their massive payout evaporate over a family dispute. "We need to settle this immediately," Harrison demanded, leaning forward and resting his hands flat on the table. "Pay them off. Give them 2 or 3 million and make them sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. It is a small price to pay to save an $80 million deal. We cannot afford to stand on principle when the acquisition is mere weeks away. Just write the check, Sydney." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every single investor. They were brilliant financial minds, but they were panicking like amateurs. They wanted to take the easy way out, offering hush money to domestic terrorists just to make the noise stop. "I am not paying them a single cent," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. Harrison scoffed, his face flushing with frustration. "This is not about your personal pride. You have a fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. You are putting everything we built at extreme risk over your stubborn refusal to handle a family squabble. It is not pride, Harrison. It is basic cybersecurity protocol." I fired back, my tone sharp and commanding. "If a hacker breaches your outer firewall and installs ransomware, you do not pay the ransom. Paying the ransom guarantees they will return, because you have just proven that extortion works. My biological family is executing a social engineering attack. If I hand them $3 million today, they will demand $10 million tomorrow. They will hold this company hostage every time we attempt a major financial move. I refuse to negotiate with extortionists." The room fell completely silent. My board members exchanged uneasy glances. They knew my logic was flawless, but their fear of losing the merger was clouding their judgment. "So, what is your strategy?" Monica asked nervously. "Because doing nothing is currently destroying our brand value." "I am not doing nothing," I explained clinically. "I am gathering forensic data. My family is highly motivated by greed, which makes them reckless. They are currently escalating their tactics because they think I am ignoring them. In their desperation to force a settlement before the merger, they will inevitably cross a hard legal boundary. They will attempt to legitimize their fake equity claim by producing forged documents. When they do, they will move from simple public defamation to federal financial fraud." Harrison stared at me, his eyes narrowing as he processed the magnitude of my strategy. "You are baiting them into committing a federal felony." "I am allowing them to dig their own graves," I corrected. "I just need you all to hold the line for 72 more hours. Do not issue any public statements. Do not respond to the media inquiries. Let them scream into the void. I am setting up a digital infrastructure that will capture their illegal activities in real time. Once I have the irrefutable proof, I will hand it over to the federal authorities and the acquiring board. The scandal will instantly transform from a story about a greedy CEO into a story about a brilliant founder stopping a major corporate extortion ring." The board members murmured among themselves. It was a massive gamble. If my family did not take the bait, or if the acquiring conglomerate pulled out early, we would lose everything. But I had spent the last 5 years proving my tactical brilliance to these people. I had taken their initial capital and turned it into an $80 million enterprise through calculated, fearless execution. "You have exactly 72 hours, Sidney Harrison said finally, his voice heavy with reluctant agreement. "If this situation is not completely neutralized by Monday morning, the board will convene to officially vote on your removal as Chief Executive Officer. We will force a settlement ourselves to save the merger." I stood up, buttoning my blazer. "You will not need to vote, Harrison. By Monday morning, the people threatening this company will be in handcuffs." I walked out of the boardroom with absolute confidence, though the clock was now ticking furiously. My board was holding off the corporate panic, but my timeline had just been severely compressed. The pressure was immense. I needed to act decisively. I needed to plant the final piece of the puzzle that would guarantee their downfall. The trap was fully constructed, but I had to make sure the right person looked at the data. It was time to arrange a highly strategic, seemingly accidental encounter with the one man who had the power to dismantle their entire operation from the inside. It was time to push Stephanie's husband, Andre, into investigating his own wife. Andre lived his entire life by the numbers. At 32, he had earned a formidable reputation as a senior financial auditor at a prestigious accounting firm. He was an African-American man who climbed the corporate ladder through sheer intellectual rigor and a strict moral compass. Theory in his world, spreadsheets did not lie and numbers told the absolute truth. I respected that fundamental trait about him. He was meticulous, observant, and intolerant of fraud, which made his marriage to my sister a fascinating psychological paradox. Stephanie had spent 3 years expertly mirroring his values to keep him blind to her true nature. She played the role of the sweet, supportive, morally upright wife to absolute perfection. But the intense strain of maintaining that facade was cracking under the weight of her own greed. Andre was returning home late that evening from a grueling audit cycle, exhausted and craving the quiet sanctuary of his suburban house. Instead, he walked directly into a frantic war room. According to the digital footprint I later uncovered, and the events Andre pieced together that Thursday evening was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. Stephanie met him at the front door, with red-rimmed eyes, a blotchy face, and violently trembling hands. She had spent the afternoon practicing her performance in front of a mirror. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing uncontrollably. Andre, possessing a protective instinct, dropped his briefcase and held her tightly, demanding to know what catastrophic event had occurred. She led him to the living room couch, where she had strategically scattered printouts of the vicious tabloid articles and the fraudulent crowdfunding campaign through perfectly timed hiccups and manufactured tears. Stephanie fed him the poison drop by drop. She told him her arrogant sister was trying to destroy their elderly parents out of pure spite. She spun a devastating narrative about how Thomas sacrificed his life savings to fund my first software venture, when I was just a struggling student. She claimed I signed a binding equity contract, promising to take care of the family financially, only to ruthlessly cut them out and leave them facing absolute ruin the moment the $80 million merger was announced. Andre sat still and listened, his strong sense of professional justice triggered by the horrible story. He abhorred corrupt executives who exploited vulnerable people for personal gain. But he was also a highly trained auditor. His analytical mind automatically sought tangible evidence to support the emotional claims. He asked gently where the original equity contracts were located and why they had not simply filed a standard breach of contract lawsuit. Stephanie tightened her grip on his hand, amplifying her fake tears to a distressed wail. She lied effortlessly without remorse. She claimed I used my elite cybersecurity skills to illegally hack their home network and wipe their family computers clean. She told him I maliciously deleted all digital records of the initial seed funding to cover my tracks. She painted a vivid picture of a cold, calculating tech villain bullying a helpless elderly couple into homelessness. It was a deeply compelling story tailored to manipulate a man whose career was dedicated to investigating corporate corruption. Andre felt a massive surge of righteous anger on behalf of his weeping wife and distressed in-laws. He asked her directly what he could do to help stop this injustice. This was the exact moment Stephanie tightened the snare around his neck. She told him they hired a brilliant lawyer who managed to discover a tiny fragment of evidence I had supposedly missed during my digital purge. She handed Andre the faded 30-year-old bank statement showing the $5,000 transfer. She framed it as undeniable concrete proof of the initial angel investment that launched my empire. Then she looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. She told him her parents were completely out of their depth, fighting a powerful tech executive. She begged Andre to use his advanced financial auditing skills to carefully review the documents they were secretly gathering. She said she needed his professional expertise to help build an airtight case against me before the corporate merger finalized. She needed him to step up and be their absolute hero. Andre stared at the highlighted bank statement. His professional instincts, honed by years of uncovering hidden corporate assets and tracing complex financial irregularities, began to churn. He promised his weeping wife he would certainly help secure true justice and analyze every single piece of important data they could possibly find. He had no idea that by agreeing to investigate my company, he was stepping directly onto the digital battlefield I had meticulously prepared. Stephanie thought she was incredibly clever. She genuinely believed she successfully weaponized her husband's brilliant, analytical mind against me. She assumed Andre would blindly accept her fabricated narrative and use his corporate authority to legitimize their sloppy extortion attempt. What she entirely failed to understand was the fundamental nature of a true auditor. Andre did not just look at the evidence presented to him. He looked closely for the anomalies. He actively searched for the hidden discrepancies in the data trail. By inviting him to look into the financial records, Stephanie had unknowingly invited the ultimate lie detector into the center of her own fraudulent scheme. The trap was perfectly set, but I needed to ensure Andre looked in the exact right direction. I needed to break through the fog of emotional manipulation and appeal directly to his cold, hard logic. I needed to give him a compelling reason to doubt the words of the woman sleeping next to him. The perfect opportunity to deliver that critical piece of information was already approaching. I confirmed their dinner reservation for the upcoming holiday weekend. It was time to orchestrate a very public collision. I was going to use their own social climbing habits against them and drop a digital breadcrumb that a man like Andre would find impossible to ignore. Through a mutual contact in the tech industry, I easily uncovered my parents' holiday plans. The Thomas always preferred to project immense wealth rather than actually possess it. For Thanksgiving weekend, he had booked a highly visible corner booth at one of the most exclusive steakhouses in the city. It was the kind of establishment where reservations required a substantial deposit, and the waitstaff wore tailored suits. I immediately instructed my assistant to secure a table for me and my chief legal counsel at the exact same time. The ambiance inside the restaurant was meticulously curated, filled with dark polished oak crystal chandeliers and the hushed conversations of Silicon Valley elite. I walked through the double doors wearing a sharp navy blue suit, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who owned her space. My attorney walked quietly beside me. I spotted them instantly. Thomas, Brenda, Stephanie, and Andre were seated at a prominent table near the center of the dining room. Thomas was already gesturing wildly to a waiter, loudly complaining about the vintage of the wine he had just tasted. Brenda sat next to him, adjusting her expensive-looking jewelry and scanning the room to see who might be watching them. And Stephanie was sipping champagne, laughing at something Thomas said. Next to her sat Andre. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, but carried an undeniable exhaustion in his posture. He looked like a man carrying the heavy burden of someone else's fabricated crisis. I adjusted my trajectory slightly, walking directly past their table on the way to my own. I made sure to lock eyes with Andre the moment he looked up. "Sydney," Andre said, standing up out of pure professional politeness. He looked deeply conflicted. He was a genuinely good man, caught in a massive web of toxic lies, trying to reconcile the ruthless corporate villain his wife described with the calm professional woman standing right in front of him. Stephanie dropped her champagne glass onto the table with a loud clatter. Her face instantly contorted into an ugly, hateful sneer. "What are you doing here? Are you stalking us now?" Thomas slammed his heavy hand flat against the crisp white tablecloth, loud enough to draw immediate stares from the adjacent diners. "You have a lot of nerves showing your face in public, Sydney. You are nothing but a thief. You would be absolutely nothing without my seed money. You stole from your own family." The surrounding tables fell completely silent. Waiters paused mid-step. Thomas was purposely creating a public spectacle, weaponizing his volume to intimidate me. I ignored him entirely. My eyes remained locked exclusively on Andre. I could see the rapid analytical gears turning in his head. He was watching my absolute calm in the face of their erratic public hostility. He was observing how a supposedly guilty person was not flinching, not raising her voice and not acting defensive. I am not here for them. Andre, I said, my voice quiet, clinical, and completely devoid of emotional reaction. I know Stephanie has told you a very compelling story about stolen funds and deleted digital records. I know she has cast herself as the helpless victim and me as the ruthless criminal. But you are a senior financial auditor. Your entire highly respected profession is based on verifying the chain of custody and examining raw data. You do not survive in your industry by trusting tearful narratives. You survive by demanding empirical proof. Andre frowned, his rigid posture stiffening as his professional instincts flared. What exactly are you saying, Sydney? I am saying, I replied, stepping slightly closer to the table, so only he could clearly hear my exact words, that a good auditor never simply trusts the story presented to them. They always check the source files. They verify the digital trail. You might want to take a very close look at your wife's personal laptop. Look deeply at her deleted files. Look at the IP routing logs. Verify the raw data yourself, Andre. Check the timestamps on the evidence they claim to possess. Do all of this before you blindly tie your impeccable professional reputation to a massive federal fraud. Do not listen to her, Andre. Stephanie shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, desperate octave. She is trying to gaslight you. She is completely crazy. She hacked our computers and destroyed the evidence. She is a liar. Andre looked down at his wife, who was now clutching his arm with white knuckles. Then he looked back at me. The seed of professional doubt was firmly planted. As an auditor, he knew that innocent people did not panic when told to verify their data. Only guilty people panicked. Stephanie's immediate hysterical reaction to my suggestion of a simple digital audit was the exact trigger he needed. Diesel, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently on the edge of their table to cover the expensive champagne they were drinking. The math never lies, Andre, I said softly. But your wife does. I turned and walked away toward my own table, my attorney falling into step beside me. I left a deafening, heavy silence in my wake. Thomas was sputtering silently. Brenda was clutching her napkin, and Stephanie was desperately whispering into Andre's ear. But Andre was no longer looking at her. He was staring directly at the $100 bill on the table, his analytical mind visibly reconstructing the entire timeline of events. I had engaged his professional curiosity and his unyielding moral compass. Andre was not the kind of man to let a direct accusation of federal fraud go uninvestigated, especially when his own career could be caught in the blast radius. Now it was time to finally spring the actual trap. The digital honeypot server was fully operational and waiting. I just needed them greedy and desperate enough to take the bait. I sat down and waited. The waiting did not take long at all. Greed is a highly predictable catalyst. When people believe they are on the verge of losing a massive unearned payday, they accelerate their timeline and abandon all caution. That weekend, while I maintained absolute silence, my family made their fatal move. They escalated their attack from public defamation to a direct legal strike against my company. Monday morning arrived with the harsh buzzing of my secure corporate cell phone. I was already at my desk reviewing the final compliance checklist for the merger. The caller ID showed Marshall, my lead corporate litigator. Marshall was a veteran of Silicon Valley legal warfare, a man who rarely raised his voice, but his tone today was sharp and heavily laced with urgency. 3 Sydney, we have a catastrophic development, Marshall stated the moment I answered the call. Your father and your sister just bypassed standard civil litigation entirely. They filed a petition for a federal injunction in the United States District Court this morning. They are seeking to instantly freeze all of your corporate assets and place an immediate hard halt on the $80 million merger. They are citing undisclosed equity disputes and massive corporate fraud. I kept my eyes locked on my monitor, my breathing steady and rhythmic. Let them file whatever they want, Marshall. Anyone can file a lawsuit. It means absolutely nothing without legally binding documentation. That is exactly the problem, Marshall replied, typing rapidly on his end of the line. They attached newly submitted documentation to the federal filing. They submitted a drafted equity contract dated exactly 7 years ago. It bears your signature. The document explicitly acknowledges Thomas as an official angel investor and contractually entitles him to 30% of all future corporate acquisitions or buyout events. My hand stopped hovering over my keyboard. I instructed Marshall to send the digital file to my encrypted inbox immediately. Within seconds, a high-resolution scan of their supposed legal weapon appeared on my screen. I opened the PDF file and examined the document with the clinical precision of a forensic expert analyzing a malicious malware code. The contract was a blatant, spectacularly sloppy forgery. It was a digital Frankenstein monster. I could immediately see the pixelation artifacts around the edges of the text, where a cheap editing software had been used. They had taken a digital signature of mine from an old publicly available tax filing, hired a black market graphic designer likely off the dark web, and clumsily spliced it onto a fabricated Word document. The typography did not even match standard legal formatting from 7 years ago. The margins were misaligned. The legal jargon was an absolute mess of buzzwords that no real corporate attorney would ever draft. But the most amusing part was the addendum. To bolster their fake contract, they had attached several printed emails. These were the exact decoy emails I had personally drafted and placed on my honeypot server. The emails contained highly suggestive fabricated conversations between myself and my late Aunt Beverly, discussing how to hide Thomas's initial $5,000 investment from the official capitalization table. They took the bait, I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. They hacked the decoy server this weekend. They downloaded the fake files and actually submitted them to a federal judge as genuine evidence. Marshall did not share my amusement. Sydney, you need to understand the absolute gravity of this situation. The acquiring conglomerate has already flagged the federal court filing. Their legal team is currently hyperventilating. We are dealing with an incredibly conservative board of directors. If a federal judge grants this temporary injunction, your assets will be completely locked down. The merger will be paused indefinitely. The acquiring company will likely pull out entirely by the end of the week to avoid inheriting a federal legal scandal. This fake document could destroy the entire $80 million deal. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, processing the variables. My family thought they had orchestrated the perfect corporate heist. They believed they had found the ultimate silver bullet to force a massive settlement. They assumed the sheer terror of losing an $80 million acquisition would make me write them a $20 million check just to make the lawsuit disappear. Marshall listened to me very carefully. I instructed, my voice dropping to a hard commanding register. Do you realize what they have just done by filing this specific document in a federal court? Yes, Marshall sighed heavily. Filing a forged document in a federal court to halt a corporate merger is wire fraud, perjury, and federal extortion. This is no longer a civil family dispute over a loan. This is a severe federal crime. They have committed a felony. Exactly, I confirmed. They just handed us the rope to hang them with. So here is the strategy. We do not contest the injunction aggressively today. We do not tip our hand. We file a standard delay motion to buy us exactly 48 hours. Marshall paused, his legal instincts fighting my corporate strategy. Sydney, if we do not crush this injunction immediately, the acquiring board will walk away. We have to present the forgery evidence to the judge right now. No, I commanded. If we strike now, Thomas and Stephanie will claim they were duped by a third party. They will play the victims and slip away. I want them to walk into our boardroom on the day of the merger signing, thinking they have a loaded gun pointed at my head. I want them to bring that fake contract into a room full of corporate executives and legally present it as truth. We are going to let them pull the trigger. Once they present that document, there will be no plausible deniability. The trap is locked. It is now over. I disconnected the call and stared at the server logs on my screen. The digital net was tightening around them now. Building the trap required incredibly meticulous preparation following their disastrous ambush at our headquarters. I needed them to find the exact evidence they wanted without making it look easy. Handing them a fake contract directly would raise suspicion. They needed to feel they outsmarted me. They needed the thrill of the heist. I resurrected a legacy server from the earliest days of my company. It ran an outdated operating system, a digital dinosaur a careless founder might forget. I intentionally isolated this server from my primary corporate network, placing it carefully in a secure virtual sandbox before crafting the bait. Creating the fabricated emails took hours. I perfectly mimicked the gentle, formal writing style of Aunt Beverly. I generated dozens of mundane fake emails about groceries and doctor appointments to bury the key documents, making the archive look like a genuine, untouched backup. Hidden within a folder labeled Personal Legal Drafts, I planted the golden tickets. I wrote email exchanges between myself and a fictitious early advisor, explicitly discussing Thomas and his $5,000 contribution. I used phrases designed to trigger my father's massive ego, suggesting I was terrified Thomas would realize how much his initial seed money was actually worth. Me, the absolute crowning jewel, was the fake equity contract template. I left a digital breadcrumb trail, indicating this document was a highly classified secret I desperately wanted, kept off the official capitalization table. Stephanie would instantly assume I was hiding illegal actions. Narcissists always project their lack of morality onto everyone else. She believed I was a fraud because she was a fraud. The next challenge was guiding them to the honeypot without explicitly handing them the map. This required careful social engineering following their demand for 30% equity. I had my legal team draft a highly aggressive cease and desist letter. We sent this letter directly to their rented attorney, Arthur Pendleton. The letter was a standard legal threat warning them to back off. However, hidden deep within the technical addendum of the digital document, I embedded a specific string of metadata. It was a routing pathway pointing directly to the IP address of my decoy server. I knew Pendleton was too incompetent to notice it, but I knew Stephanie. She was deeply entwined in the darker corners of the internet, searching for cheap graphic designers to forge documents. I gambled. She would hand that document over to whatever black market freelancer she hired, asking them to scan it for vulnerabilities. Any amateur hacker would immediately spot the hidden IP address and assumed they had discovered a massive unpatched backdoor into my personal archives. The true beauty of the honeypot was its silent aggression. The server was not passively holding fake documents. It was heavily armed with tracking payloads. The second an unauthorized user breached the outer firewall, the server initiated a silent lockdown procedure. It did not block the intruder. Instead, it welcomed them in granting full access to the fake directories. Simultaneously, the server deployed a micro-tracking script directly into the intruder's browser. This script was entirely invisible to the end user, transmitting a continuous stream of forensic data back to my highly secure main terminal. It bypassed their cheap commercial private networks. It logged their exact geographical location. It captured their unique device fingerprint, documenting the specific make and model of the laptop they were using. It recorded their keystroke dynamics and monitored every single file they opened, previewed, and downloaded. I sat alone in my home office all weekend, watching the digital trap spring shut. The initial breach occurred late Saturday night, flashing red alerts on my monitors confirmed. The intruder was rapidly downloading the entire folder of fabricated emails and the fake equity contract. They were pulling the poison directly into their local hard drive. They thought they had successfully executed a brilliant corporate espionage maneuver. They thought they had secured the weapon that would force me to hand over $20 million. As I carefully analyzed the incoming forensic data packets, a sudden cold realization settled over me. The IP address the attackers used was not routed through a foreign proxy server. The raw data showed the breach originating from a residential internet service provider located right here in the United States. At exactly 8:04 on a chilly Tuesday morning, my debit card was declined over a 4.17 gallon of milk at the Kroger on East Main Street in Carmel, Indiana. I figured the card reader was acting up. Then I called my husband, Mark, and he laughed before saying, "You're spending too much." 10 seconds later, his daughter took the phone and calmly added, Ask permission before you spend another dollar. Dell, I wish I could tell you. I snapped back with something clever. I didn't. I just stood there holding that gallon of milk while the cashier waited. The young woman behind the register couldn't have been older than 25. She gave me the kind of sympathetic smile people wear when they're trying not to embarrass you. I'm sorry, she said softly. Would you like me to try it one more time? I nodded. She inserted the card again. Beep. Declined. A man pushing a shopping cart shifted his weight behind me. Somewhere farther down the checkout lanes, a baby started crying. A little boy, in line with his mother, looked up at me and whispered, a little louder than he probably realized, Mom, why doesn't her card work? His mother quietly shushed him. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Instead, I reached into my purse for my phone. Mark answered on the second ring. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something's wrong with our debit card. There was a pause. Then he chuckled. Not a nervous laugh, not confusion, a real laugh. Maybe it's about time. I frowned. What does that mean? It means you've been spending too much lately. I honestly thought I had misheard him. Mark, I'm buying milk. Well, he said, it all adds up. Before I could answer, I heard another voice. Ashley, Dad let me. The phone shifted. Then she spoke like she was explaining something to a stubborn child. Linda, from now on, and ask permission before you spend another dollar. Permission? I actually looked around to make sure I'd heard correctly. For a second, I couldn't even find words. Not because I was angry, because I was trying to understand how 17 years of marriage had somehow led to this moment. I'm buying groceries, I finally managed. We're protecting Dad, Ashley replied. Somebody has to. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for another few seconds before lowering the phone. The cashier pretended not to notice my face. Would you like me to put these aside? She asked. I swallowed. No. I opened the small hidden pocket behind my driver's license and pulled out the emergency $20 bill I'd carried for years. My father had taught me that trick when I was 16. Always keep enough cash to get yourself home. I'd never imagined I'd need it because of my own husband. I'll just take the milk, I said quietly. I set the bananas and loaf of wheat bread aside. The total came to $4.17 plus tax. As I carried the bag to my car, the cold November wind hit my face harder than usual. I sat behind the steering wheel for almost a full minute without starting the engine. This couldn't be about money, it simply couldn't. Mark knew exactly how our finances worked. Or at least, I thought he did. When we married 17 years earlier, we'd both already lived full lives. We'd each buried a spouse, we'd each raised children. Neither of us was looking for another fairy tale. We just liked each other. Mark made me laugh. I made him feel calm. That had seemed enough. Over the years, I'd handled most of the paperwork because I'd spent 32 years as an HR director. Budgets, insurance, retirement planning, it all came naturally to me. Mark hated paperwork. He'd always say, you handle the numbers, I'll handle fixing everything else. And for years, that's exactly what we did until he retired. Something changed after that. It wasn't overnight, more like watching a crack spread across a windshield. Slowly, quietly. At first, he only asked more questions. How much did groceries cost this month? Why are utility bills higher? Do we really need to replace that dishwasher? Nothing unreasonable. Then Ashley began visiting more often. She'd recently moved back to Indianapolis after her divorce. She insisted she only wanted to help Dad stay organized. At first, I welcomed it. She organized filing cabinets, sorted mail, even offered to pay bills online. I thought she was trying to reconnect with her father. I never imagined she was quietly changing the way he saw me. I finally started the car. Home was only 12 minutes away. Instead of turning toward our subdivision, I drove straight through the next intersection, then another. Without really deciding, I found myself heading toward downtown Carmel. Rebecca Ellis's office sat on the second floor of a brick building across from the courthouse square. I'd known Rebecca almost 15 years. She'd handled my parents' estate planning after my mother passed. She looked up the moment I stepped inside. Linda? I forced a smile. It didn't fool her. She closed the folder she'd been reading. What happened? I sat down across from her desk. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I whispered, I think my husband just let his daughter decide what kind of wife I deserve to be. Rebecca didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply handed me a box of tissues. I didn't take one. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and slid several folders onto her desk. Checking account statements, property records, trust documents, investment summaries. Dear Rebecca looked at the first page, then the second. Her eyebrows slowly lifted. She looked back at me. Linda. Her voice became very quiet. Whose money have they actually been trying to control? I met her eyes. I don't think Mark even knows. Rebecca turned another page, then another. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. For the first time that morning, someone wasn't looking at me with pity. She was looking at me with concern. And something else, resolve. She folded her hands together and said, "Before we do anything else, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at that grocery store." I took a slow breath. For the first time since 8F, I felt like someone was finally listening. Rebecca listened without interrupting. I told her about the 2 declined swipes, Mark's laugh, and Ashley's voice coming through the phone like she had every right in the world to discipline me. I repeated the exact sentence. Ask permission before you spend another dollar. Rebecca took off her reading glasses and placed them on the desk. Did Mark tell you beforehand that he was restricting your access? No. Did you agree to it? No. Did Ashley have your permission to manage any account in your name? Absolutely not. Rebecca nodded once, then opened the first folder I had brought. She had the habit of going very still when she was concentrating. Her eyes moved down the pages while one finger followed the account numbers. This checking account is joint, she said. Yes, household expenses. And this savings account? Joint too. Mostly property taxes and home repairs. She turned to the next statement. But your pension deposits here. My individual account. And the brokerage account is solely yours. Yes, the family trust? My parents established it before they died. She reached for the property record. And you bought the house in 1998, 8 years before I met Mark. Rebecca looked up. How much of Mark's money went toward the original purchase? None. Major renovations? I paid for most of them. He did some of the work himself. She nodded and continued reading. The truth was, I had always been careful about documentation. 32 years in human resources will do that to you. You learn quickly that memories get selective when money or pride enters the room. Still, seeing my life reduced to folders made my stomach hurt. The house, the pension, the trust, the brokerage account. They weren't symbols of wealth to me. They were years. Early mornings, missed lunches, caring for my parents while working full-time, sitting at a kitchen table after my first husband died, trying to calculate whether I could keep the house alone. Rebecca closed one file. Linda, they did not freeze everything. I know that now. They may not know that. I gave a dry little laugh. No, I don't think they do. Rebecca leaned back. Tell me about Mark's business. That caught me off guard. What about it? You said he had financial trouble before retirement. I looked toward the window. Outside, a delivery driver was unloading boxes from a white van. Ordinary life kept moving, while mine had stopped somewhere between the dairy aisle and this office. 5 years ago, 2 commercial clients didn't pay him, I said. One filed bankruptcy. The other dragged the invoice through court for almost a year. How much did he owe? Between suppliers, payroll taxes, and a line of credit, a little over $140,000. Rebecca's expression tightened. How did he resolve it? I looked down at my hands. I helped him. How much? Most of it. She waited. I used money from an investment account and refinanced a small portion against the house. We paid the IRS first, then his suppliers. I negotiated a reduced settlement on the credit line. Was that documented as a loan to him? No. Why not? Because he was my husband. The answer sounded foolish in a lawyer's office. Rebecca didn't criticize me. She just asked, did Ashley know? I don't think so. Mark didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten. That was the part I had protected most carefully. Mark had always been proud of his work. He could walk into a half-finished room and see what it would become. He knew framing, drywall, electrical codes, every supplier in central Indiana. Men called him when they needed advice. Then his business nearly failed. He stopped sleeping, lost 15 pounds, started checking the mailbox before I could get to it, because he didn't want me seeing another notice. One night, I found him sitting in the garage with the lights off. I can't fix this, he said. It was the first time I had ever heard him admit that. So I fixed what I could, not because he asked, because I loved him. And afterward, we never discussed it again. At the time, I thought that was kindness. Sitting in Rebecca's office, I began to wonder whether their silence had allowed him to rewrite the story. Retirement was hard on him, I said. Harder than he admitted. Rebecca gestured for me to continue. For years, everyone needed him. Employees, customers, subcontractors. Then suddenly, he was home by 10 in the morning, with nowhere he had to be. At first, Mark attacked retirement like a home renovation. He cleaned the garage, rebuilt the deck stairs, organized every screw and nail into labeled bins. By the third month, the projects ran out. He started watching cable news until lunchtime. He gained weight around his middle and complained about his knees. Some mornings he stayed in the same flannel shirt until dinner. I tried to include him in financial decisions. That only seemed to make things worse. If I asked whether we should move money into a higher yield account, he heard, "You don't understand this." If I reminded him about an insurance deadline, he heard, "You can't handle anything anymore." Then Ashley moved back from Louisville after her divorce. At first, she came by for Sunday dinner, then twice a week, then almost every day. She knew exactly what to say to him. "Dad, you built a company from thing. Dad, you shouldn't have to ask Linda about your own money. Dad, she acts like you're one of her employees." I heard pieces of those conversations from the kitchen. When I confronted Mark, he dismissed it. "She's worried about me. She's stirring up trouble. She's my daughter, Linda." That sentence ended every discussion. Rebecca reached for her legal pad. "How much debt does Ashley have?" "I don't know exactly. A lot. Any evidence?" "She left a credit card statement on our counter 2 months ago." I wasn't snooping, it was open. "How much?" "Just over 26,000 on that card." Rebecca wrote something down. "She has others, at least 3, and a car she can't afford." "Has Mark given her money?" "Yes, small amounts," I thought. 500 here, 1,000 there." "From where?" I felt a cold pressure behind my ribs. "The household account." Rebecca's pen stopped. "How often?" "I don't know." She turned the laptop toward herself and began listing what we needed. Complete statements, recent transfers, login changes, copies of any powers of attorney, beneficiary designations, and communication between Mark and Ashley. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. "This may be more than a marital argument. Restricting access to shared funds, especially without notice, can be evidence of financial coercion. If Ashley is influencing transfers for her own benefit, we need to know immediately." I stared at her. "Are you saying she's stealing?" "I'm saying we don't guess, we document." That was Rebecca. Calm words, hard edges. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing account structures. Mark and Ashley had managed to interfere with the joint household account and online access linked to it. They had not touched my pension, brokerage account, inherited trust, or the deed to the house. Rebecca allowed herself one small smile. "They've been guarding the bird feeder while you still own the whole farm." Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I thought about the man I had found in the dark garage 5 years earlier. The man I had protected. The man who now thought I needed permission to buy milk. Rebecca drafted a list of immediate steps. Revoke Mark's authority over my individual accounts. Update my estate plan. Replace my healthcare proxy. Document every transfer, and prepare separation papers without filing them until we understood the full picture. "Nothing dramatic today," she said. "No threats, no social media, no confrontation." I wasn't planning one. I know, that's why I'm saying it. By the time I left, the sky had turned gray. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I might say to Mark. Then I opened the front door. 3 flattened moving boxes leaned against the hallway wall. More were stacked in the guest room. Ashley stood beside them with a black marker in her hand. She smiled as if we were planning a garage sale. "We're just getting ready," she said, "in case you decide to leave." Mark was sitting in the den. He heard her. He didn't say a word. That night, I lay awake beside him while he pretended to sleep. The red numbers on the clock moved from 1:17 to 2:03, then 3:26. On the dresser sat our wedding picture from 17 years earlier. Mark was thinner then. I had fewer lines around my eyes. We looked relieved more than romantic. like two people who had found safe ground after separate storms. I stared at that photograph and wondered whether I was about to destroy my family over a gallon of milk. Then I remembered Ashley's voice. Not the words themselves, the certainty behind them, and I understood something I had been avoiding. The milk had only shown me the door. They had been pushing me toward it for months. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I heard the checkout scanner beep, declined. Then Ashley's voice asked
Permission?
By 6:30 Wednesday morning, I was already dressed. Mark was in the kitchen pouring cereal. He glanced up when I walked in. Morning. His voice sounded almost normal, almost. I poured myself a cup of coffee without answering. He watched me for a moment. Still upset? I looked at him. Are you? He shrugged. I think you're making this into something bigger than it is. Bigger than what? The debit card. I set my mug down. It wasn't about the card. He sighed as though I were exhausting him. Ashley and I have been talking. I nearly laughed. I know. We're just trying to make sure we're careful with money now that I'm retired. Careful. That word bothered me more than I expected. We'd spent 17 years making financial decisions together. I'd never bought designer handbags, never collected expensive jewelry. Our vacations were usually weekend trips to Brown County or Michigan. I clipped coupons, compared insurance rates every year, packed leftovers for lunch. If anyone in that marriage had been careful with money, it had been me. I looked at Mark one last time. I'm going out. He nodded without asking where. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. Rebecca's office had already prepared most of the paperwork. She'd emailed me a checklist the night before. Bring identification, bring property records, bring retirement statements. Don't discuss legal matters with Mark. Don't answer emotional text messages. Simple, methodical, exactly what I needed. By 10, we were sitting inside the Carmel branch of Heritage Community Bank with Nancy Gomez, the branch manager Rebecca had known for years. Nancy was about my age, warm smile, gray streaks through dark hair. She spoke softly enough that nobody nearby could overhear. Mrs. Harper, she said. Rebecca explained the situation generally. Before we make any changes, I need to verify every instruction directly from you. She spent nearly 45 minutes reviewing documents. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no security guards, just signatures, initials, identification, more signatures. We revoked every authorization I had voluntarily granted years earlier on my individual accounts. Nancy explained everything carefully. These updates won't appear immediately. I understand. Our processing department usually finishes by tomorrow afternoon. That's fine. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Everything about this process felt surprisingly ordinary. People imagine revenge as slammed doors and dramatic speeches. Real life is paperwork. Real life is waiting. Real life is signing your name 23 times while realizing your marriage is quietly ending. Instead of driving home, I went to my sister Carol's house in Fishers. Carol opened the front door before I even knocked. She took one look at my face. Oh, honey. She wrapped both arms around me. For the first time since Tuesday morning, I cried. Not loudly, just enough to let the pressure escape. Carol didn't ask questions until we were sitting with bowls of homemade vegetable soup. After listening quietly, she shook her head. I never liked how often Ashley was over there. I thought she was rebuilding her relationship with her dad. So did I. Carol reached across the table. What are you hoping happens? I stared into my soup. I don't know. That's not true. I sighed. I guess I stopped. What? I keep hoping Mark will wake up. Carol smiled sadly. Sometimes people don't wake up until they lose something. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Mark. I stared at the screen. Rebecca had been very clear. Don't answer. The ringing stopped. Then another call, then another. Voicemail, then silence. I almost called back. My thumb hovered over the screen. Maybe he'd realized how cruel Tuesday had been. Maybe he wanted to apologize. Before I could decide, another message arrived. This one from Ashley. Dad's confused. Stop trying to scare him. I locked the phone. Confused? Mark hadn't sounded confused at Kroger. He'd sounded amused. Thursday morning felt strangely peaceful. Carol insisted we go for a walk out around Gist Reservoir. Adi. The leaves had already started turning brown. A cool breeze came off the water. For nearly an hour, neither of us talked about lawyers or banks. We talked about grandchildren, retirement, her tomatoes refusing to grow this year. Ordinary conversation. It reminded me that life was still happening outside my marriage. Around 3:30 that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca. They've processed everything. So, it's done? The revocations are complete, I thanked her. Before I could put the phone away, another call appeared. Mark. Then another. Ashley. Then another. Mark. Voicemail notification, text, another call, another voicemail. The phone vibrated so often it practically crawled across Carol's kitchen table. She looked at the screen. My goodness. I counted 14 missed calls, then 22, then 30. The number kept climbing. By 5:15 there were 41 missed calls. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Carol asked, "What happened?" Before I could answer, Rebecca called again. "This is exactly what I expected." "What do you mean?" "Nobody at the bank told Mark anything confidential." "So, why?" "He tried accessing one of your investment accounts online." I stayed quiet. "He couldn't," Rebecca continued. "Then he attempted to transfer money using the home equity line you allowed him to access years ago." My stomach tightened. "He couldn't reach that either." "He called the bank?" "Several times." "And?" "They simply confirmed his authorization had changed." Nothing more. No secrets, no private information. Just a very simple fact. The access he once had no longer existed. Rebecca lowered her voice. "Linda." "Yes? There's something else." I immediately heard it in her tone, not panic, urgency. "What is it?" She took a slow breath. "One joint savings account slipped through our first review." "The emergency account?" "Yes. About $38,000. Money we'd set aside over the years for unexpected home repairs and medical expenses. It's still jointly accessible." My pulse jumped. "So, Ashley," Rebecca finished the sentence. "If she convinces Mark to empty it before we file additional protections, they legally can." The room suddenly felt much cold. Carol had been listening from across the table. She already knew from my face. "Is it bad?" I nodded slowly. Rebecca spoke one last sentence before hanging up. "I've already started preparing the paperwork." "Can we stop them?" A pause. "I honestly don't know." That evening, I watched the sun disappear behind Carol's backyard trees. 41 missed calls. None of them apologized, none asked how I was. Every voicemail began the same way. "Linda, call me." "Linda, we need to talk." "Linda, answer your phone." Not one said, "I'm sorry." For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. Maybe I was trying to save myself. Just as I was about to silence the phone for the night, Rebecca texted, "Be in my office at 8:30 tomorrow. We may still have one move left." I stared at the message, then at the dark screen reflecting my face. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Rebecca was already on her second cup of coffee when Carol and I walked into her office Friday morning. She didn't waste time. I filed for a temporary restraining order on the disputed savings account at 7:30. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, they can't empty it? Not without creating a much bigger legal problem for themselves. What if they already tried? Rebecca slid a printed document across the desk. They did. I stared at it. A transaction record from the previous evening. Attempted transfer, $35,000. Status, declined. Pending restriction. I closed my eyes. Mark had actually tried. Maybe Ashley had convinced him. Maybe he'd done it willingly. At that moment, I honestly didn't know which possibility hurt more. Rebecca spoke gently. "I don't think this was about needing the money. No, it was about control." I nodded. For the first time in 3 days, I finally believed her. By lunchtime, my phone had gone strangely quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. The silence almost worried me more. Around 1, Carol looked over from her kitchen table. "Frank called." I looked up. "Frank Donovan?" She nodded. "He still does that neighborhood cookout every November." "I know. He wanted to make sure we're both coming tomorrow." I almost laughed. "The last thing I need right now is a barbecue with Mark's friends." Carol smiled. I told him everything. "You did what?" He asked why you sounded upset earlier this week. And I wasn't going to lie. I rubbed my forehead. "Carol, he already knows more than you think." Saturday afternoon arrived cold but sunny. Frank's backyard looked almost exactly as it had every November for the past 15 years. Portable heaters, folding tables, homemade chili, college football playing quietly on an outdoor television. Normally, I loved these gatherings. This year, Every step toward the backyard felt heavier. People noticed me immediately. Some hugged me, others gave uncomfortable smiles. A few looked away altogether. Ashley had clearly been busy. Within minutes, I began hearing pieces of conversations. Heard she's leaving, Mark. Something about hiding money. Poor guy, just retired. I kept smiling. Not because I felt happy, because I refused to defend myself before anyone had actually asked me a question. Frank greeted me with a warm hug. I'm glad you came. So am I, although I wasn't completely sure that was true. About half an hour later, Mark arrived. Ashley climbed out of his truck first. She looked confident. Too confident. Almost like she'd rehearsed something. Mark looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved. His shoulders seemed lower than I'd ever seen them. For one brief second, our eyes met. He looked away first. We'd barely finished eating when Ashley stood beside the picnic table, holding a paper plate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The entire yard slowly grew quiet. I just think families should know the truth. Frank frowned. Ashley. No, really. She turned toward me. My dad spent his whole life working. Several people nodded politely. And now she sighed dramatically. He's being abandoned because he's retired. I could actually hear Carol mutter, "Oh, Lord." Ashley continued. Linda froze him out financially. There it was. Exactly the story she'd been telling everyone. My father can't even access his own money anymore. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone asked quietly, "Is that true?" I opened my mouth. Frank spoke first. Wait. He looked genuinely confused. What money? Ashley blinked. What do you mean? Frank scratched his head. I thought Linda handled almost everything. Ashley smiled tightly. Dad supported them. Frank stared at her. No. He looked around the yard. After the business almost went under. The conversation stopped. Completely. Ashley frowned. What business? Frank slowly turned toward Mark. You never told her? Mark's face lost what little color remained. Frank looked honestly surprised. I thought everybody knew. Nobody bespoke. Frank continued carefully. When Mark nearly lost his company, he looked at me apologetically. Linda kept it alive. Ashley laughed. That's ridiculous. Frank didn't react. I was there. He looked around the gathering. I helped Mark move equipment into storage while creditors were calling. People began listening much more closely. Frank pointed gently toward me. Linda negotiated with suppliers. He looked at Mark. She worked out the IRS payment plan. Another pause. She even refinanced her own house. Ashley stared at her father. Dad? Mark remained silent. Frank wasn't finished. When Mark needed knee surgery, he looked toward another neighbor. Remember? The man nodded. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. Frank smiled sadly. Linda paid that deductible too. Someone quietly whispered. I never knew. Neither had anyone else. Ashley looked completely lost. She turned toward Mark. Tell them. He didn't. Instead, he lowered his eyes. For 17 years, I'd protected his pride. I never corrected people when they assumed he'd rescued himself. I never mentioned the nights we spent balancing overdue invoices. I never told anyone I'd quietly cashed investments to save his business. Not because I wanted credit, because I loved him. Frank sighed. You know what the saddest part is? Nobody answered. He looked directly at Mark. You spent years pretending you rebuilt everything yourself. Then his voice softened. When the truth is, your wife never once made you feel smaller for needing help. The silence that followed felt endless. Ashley suddenly looked at me differently. Not with kindness, with confusion, almost panic, because the story she'd built was collapsing. She tried one last time. So, she's still abandoning him? No. The voice came from behind us. Rebecca. I hadn't even realized she'd arrived. She walked calmly across the yard holding a folder. I stopped by because Linda forgot these. She handed me the folder, then looked politely toward the group. For everyone's peace of mind, she smiled professionally. The court approved a temporary emergency hearing next week. Ashley stiffened. Rebecca continued. Not about dividing property. She looked directly at Mark, only to determine whether financial authority was improperly exercised. Mark slowly closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked ashamed, not embarrassed, ashamed. Ashley reached for his arm. Dad. He quietly stepped away from her. Just one step, but everyone noticed, including me. As people slowly drifted back toward their conversations, Mark finally walked over. He stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, too far to touch. He looked older than he had just 1 week earlier. I didn't think his voice cracked. I know. No, he shook his head. I really didn't. I waited, maybe for an apology, maybe for an explanation. Instead, he whispered. Ashley said he couldn't finish. For the first time, I realized something heartbreaking. My husband hadn't just believed lies. He'd needed them to be true. Because believing them allowed him to stop feeling guilty about everything I'd sacrificed for him. Rebecca quietly touched my elbow. We should go. I nodded. As we walked toward the parking area, Rebecca leaned close. Tuesday isn't the final hearing. I know. But it may become the day your husband finally hears the truth. I looked back once. Mark was standing alone beside Frank's old maple tree. Ashley was talking.